Welcome into episode 225. Be sure you're following us on Twitter at BaileyJAdams22, at ByCASimmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. You can also email us at PegasusPodcast by ksn@gmail.com. Christian, my whole week is thrown off because we did post-game podcast Saturday night. We decided, all right, let's not record Monday because it's too close. Now it's Tuesday and we're recording, and tomorrow's Wednesday as we're recording this, but it's also kind of like Friday because we're flying out to Fort Worth on Thursday.
This is
So
true.
there's a lot. My brain's all over the place.
A
So
lot
this will be a
going
good
on.
podcast.
Yeah, I'd somehow the first week didn't prepare me for. I'd forgotten how quick the turnaround is from the post game pods to the preview pods because it was a Thursday game, so I was protected from that very fast. Felt like we had just done the podcast and now we are back.
I
But
think I texted you on Sunday. I was like, "Are we gonna do the podcast tomorrow?" And you're like, I don't know if we should do that.
yeah,
So
but honestly, I forgot how much I hate doing them on Tuesdays. So maybe we will do them on Mondays going forward. We'll figure it out. I feel like another personal thing we should share is that we are going to Fort Worth for the game. It's our one road trip we do every year, and we have made
yeah,
like no plans for the 3 days. 3 days we're gonna be there? 4 days? Three
3 days, 2.5 days.
Like this is bad. We have not like we sort of today formulated a day one plan.
Yeah, I
Um,
think I think we'll be all right.
we'll see. We'll see.
Did
I
we,
think that
did we go
I,
into Cincinnati with a lot of plans, like for the first couple days?
yeah, I feel like we did. I feel like we knew what we were gonna do. And Memphis, we definitely did. Memphis, we had like an
Yeah,
itinerary. Like we got
yeah.
stuff done in Memphis. I also like pre-scouted Memphis for our trip because I got in a day before you for some reason. So I just so you showed up and I was like, I'm now an expert because I walked down Beale Street one time. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Should be interesting. The people who warned us like months ago when we booked this that Fort Worth and Dallas are a very spread out area, we're not lying.
Hmm.
There is nothing that is not Uberable. Uberable? It's a word now. Uberable. Everything is wait, would that make
There's
it
nothing.
Uberable?
Yeah, I'm confused at what I don't get what you're getting
Let
at.
me just let me
There's nothing
redo
that's
that
not
let me
Uberable.
redo that sentence since it made no sense. There is not a single walkable thing in this entire city. Like
Okay.
if we wish to leave the hotel, it will be in an Uber the entire time we're there, which is going to make this an expensive trip, which should be fun.
Yeah,
I'm
be
looking forward
great.
to it though.
I'm looking forward to it, except for all the money we're going to spend.
And for if
Um,
UCF loses, in which case we'll wish we'd never done the trip, but what can you do?
yeah, exactly. But we'll preview the TCU game coming up. We only have a couple things from the Sam Houston game to get to. As I was kind of like, we always do the things we missed, and then I was kind of like thinking things up, and I feel like kind of fitting because halfway through the Sam Houston podcast on Saturday night, I was like, I'm kind of out of things to say about this game. Like, yeah, things went pretty well, and there's not a lot to get through. And I coming up today, I was like, what do we need to discover or to talk about from this? What are you laughing at?
No, I can't say it. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
I opened Twitter and it's a meme that SMU account posted that I definitely can't say on the
No.
podcast, but
Okay.
it's really
I thought you were
funny.
laughing at something I was saying, so that's why I had
I'm
to
sorry.
ask.
I'm not no, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be the guy who's like my biggest pet peeve in the world when I watch or listen to things is the like, here's a thing, but we can't talk about it. I'm not comfortable saying something from this on the podcast, but it's
I'm
a funny meme.
sure if you're listening to
Um,
this podcast, you'll probably have seen it, honestly. It just feels like a likely thing.
yeah.
But yeah, so a couple things we're gonna get through. Not really even much to talk about, just a couple of facts. UCF was much better offensively on third downs against Sam Houston than they were against New Hampshire. They were 4 of 11 against New Hampshire, which is something I didn't really realize because they scored 57 points. But a lot of that was down to KJ kind of being inaccurate early on and struggling a little bit. They were 8 of 13 against Sam Houston, a lot better, basically doubled their percentage. So I don't know, that kind of stuff from like week to week is not always sustainable. You'd like to see them get to third down fewer than 11 or 13 times, but you know, we'll see. We'll get into the TCU stuff and how this is the first real test. But is there anything you want to cover on that, or can I just move on?
So I've had a fear
Okay.
because when you sent me that stat about the third down, so that was interesting, nice improvement. And then I thought more about it. And then I was thinking about TCU and how when we were getting our preview together for them, I basically ignored the Long Island game because I was like, what are we
Yeah.
going to learn from that? And then I realized that's been UCF's whole season. And I had the fear develop of because I've kind of decided through 2 games, which is very stupid, that I'm like, they could win the Big 12. Like, I don't mean that I'm like projecting that in any way, but
Well,
it just
so
feels
has
like,
FPI or whatever. Like,
yeah,
didn't when was
ESPN,
that?
ESPN FPI, which every single time I see a UCF fan say something like post the ESPN FPI thing and be like, oh, look, this is cool. I actually want to take a wall and slam my head into it because if you weren't around in 2017 and 2018, the whole famous thing from those 2 seasons was UCF would have win their like 20th game in a row. And it's like ESPN FPI has moved them up to 42nd. Like it's a stupid metric. It's also just genuinely a horrible metric. I don't know why ESPN uses it, especially because that metric has a 5-year cycle. Like it's pulling numbers from UCF 5 years ago to come up with its number for today. And especially in the portal era, that does not make one little tiny bit of sense. So I hate it. But anyway, yeah, the ESPN literally put on one of their day shows on ESPN2 that, oh yeah, UCF has the best odds to make the playoff out of the Big 12. All I'm saying is that through 2 games, I've kind of probably ignorantly, just from what we've seen, I'm like, I'm not expecting them to win the league. I'm really not. I'm still expecting like 8-4 or 9-3, but it just kind of feels like they have the tools where I'm like, yeah, I feel like if things broke that way, they could do it. And the fear I've had as I've thought more about the fact that we actually know nothing at this stage is they could be terrible. Like they could go 5-7 and we just haven't realized yet because they played 2 pretty bad opponents. We just have no way of realizing that they're not a good team. So that's my takeaways. It's just funny because you sending that third down stat, I'm just like, nice improvement. And I'm like, what am I talking about? It's 2 games that don't matter. Like it's just so I don't know. Now I'm in my head.
I mean, it was what we talked about all off season, and then even leading into those 2 games. So it was like, oh, like UCF's starting the season with two games that we're not going to really learn much from. But we're coming out of those 2 games, we're like, we've learned a lot. Not really.
Which
like we've
learned,
gotten to see
like,
some
who's
things.
going to play. That's kind of it.
We've seen some things, but we haven't learned anything really about what the level of this team. Like we'll find out a lot more on Saturday.
Can I offer a hot take? May I present you with one? I don't think we're going to learn much more on Saturday because the killer is we also don't really know what TCU is yet. So it's like they could go lose to TCU and we'd be like, oh man, turns out they suck. And then TCU wins the Big 12, or they could blow out TCU and we're going to be like, wow, it turns out we're the best in the conference. Then TCU turns out to be a 3-9 team or something. I feel like we're somehow still not going to learn anything.
I don't think we're going to learn anything in any week. I think that's kind of what we've got to remember again.
That's college football,
the Big
right?
12. It's college football. It's the Big 12 where it's like they could go out and beat TCU by 40, and then as bad as Colorado looked against Nebraska, Colorado could come in 2 weeks and beat UCF by 20. Like week to week, it's insane.
Notre Dame goes on the road and beats Texas A&M and then loses to Northern Illinois at home as a top 5 team. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. We'll just talk about what's going to happen, even though we have no idea at any given point.
We'll learn nothing on a week-to-week basis.
I really do sometimes. Sorry, I really do sometimes, and I'm saying this sarcastically because I obviously don't actually miss the AAC, but there was like sort of a comfortability in it of just like there being a lot of weeks where it was just like, yeah, UCF will win. Not much to talk about. Other team sucks. And now it's just every week I'm like, who knows what's going to happen? It could be a crisis.
We talked about this on the postgame podcast. It was like, oh, like I'm excited for UCF to get to like a game that really matters. And then I woke up Monday morning and I was like, oh, I forgot about the like fear and anxiety that, comes with a week where you're like, I don't know if they're going to win or lose on Saturday. And, my week for this game where there's a bye week next week, this will determine my mood maybe for the next 2 weeks. So that's the thing that I've been thinking about for the last 48 hours.
It really is just a week-long stress. And since it's been a while, I have forgotten how much it sucks to just sit here afraid of what's going to happen. But
I think it's especially since we're going, like, so we're leaving in 2 days for this trip. And I'm just kind of like, I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also like, oh man, what if it doesn't end well?
It's tough because we went to Memphis last year and they won. No, we didn't. That was 2 years ago. We went to Cincinnati last year and they won. Yes. It was a great trip. We got to see their first ever Big 12 win. Didn't think it'd be in November, but it happened. And solid trip. Love Cincinnati. We've established since that you forgot about the time that I was afraid while we were getting ice cream, but water under the bridge. The year before that, we went to Memphis. They won. We had a great trip. The year before that, we went to Louisville and they lost. And you and I hate the city of Louisville. And I've kind of in my head been like, did we hate Louisville because we hated Louisville or because UCF lost? So we now just associate that city with sadness.
Both.
Probably both.
It's both. Like there was nothing to do.
I will say you were out on Louisville pretty early into the trip. Like even before UCF had lost, you were not interested in that city.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I have a feeling that our feelings on Fort Worth will be somewhat determined on what UCF does on that field.
What also is bad for me is like we can have a great time on Thursday, have a great time Friday, all day Saturday, do great. The game itself is the last thing because like it's Saturday night is the game. I fly out like at 7 a.m. the next morning to get back home for the Bucks game. So it's it's going to be the lasting impression. No, I know I had to do that. Yeah. But it's just like the TCU game is the last thing. So I'm either going to wake up for that flight like, all right, at least they won. I'm really tired, but they won last night, or I like don't want to do this anymore.
That is going to be, if they lost, that will be a hellish morning for you. Just everything that goes with that. Yeah, it's not great. Maybe we shouldn't have done this. I don't know. Maybe this was a bad idea.
Might have been. Okay, other thing about Sam Houston game, just an RJ Harvey stat. He's now UCF's 6th leading rusher all time. He has 2,483 yards. He needs 87 more to pass Marquette Smith for 5th and 138 more to pass Greg McCrae for 4th. What did I tell you last week? I think I said like by the end of the season, assuming he has the kind of season we're expecting, he'll be second, right? Or he very likely could be second. I think that's what I
If I
said.
remember right, he would still need. I'm looking at it. He needs when did you text me this? Sorry, I'm looking at
I think
time.
this was after New
Before
Hampshire. I said
the
he needed
Sam
1,000 more
Houston game.
yards, I
Yes,
think.
before the Sam Houston game, he needed 1,000 yards to get to second. So he's on his way. And
Yeah.
which for younger listeners or the less informed, second is like the best anyone will ever do for UCF because of Kevin Smith's existence. So that would be a dramatic accomplishment if he does manage to
Yeah.
get to second. Which, like I said, which then you and I should just read that. Can I just read this
I don't remember what I
text
said, but as
exchange?
long as there's nothing bad, probably, yeah.
There's nothing bad. So you
Okay.
said 1,000 more yards and he'll be second. And I said his rightful place. And then I said he can get 1,000 from here, right? You said I want that so bad for him. And you'd think. And then you said he needs to average 90.9 yards per game. And then I said the bowl game, though. You said assuming he doesn't play in the bowl game. And then I replied, why would he skip a CFP game? So
And then I
that's where
decided
we're at.
that right then I decided that I didn't like you anymore.
You immediately changed the conversation. I said that, and you were like, "We're done." Like seriously, you sent like the annoyed emoji face, and then just asked about the Colorado kickoff time. Like we moved on immediately after that comment. But yeah, so you heard it here first. RJ Harvey will earn second place on UCF's all-time running backs rushing yard list in a college football playoff game. Very exciting.
Sure. All right, let's preview the UCF TCU game. Kind of going to get into a little bit of a new format, if you want to call it that. It's, I don't know, pretty loosely structured. We're going to go through what's at stake, kind of talk a little bit about TCU itself, the team, opponent preview, I guess we can call it, and then the outlook for the game. And then we'll do score predictions, which you said we could do and we'll be wrong about. And then as I made my score prediction, I was like, I forgot I hate doing score predictions because they make no sense. But yeah, so I mean, we've already hinted at it. What's at stake is the fact that this is UCF's first real test, and whatever happens, like if they win, they'll be 3-0 and the vibes will be great. If they lose, it's like, okay, they failed their first real test and the season's doomed.
If they win, next week's going to be so fun. 3-0 going in the Colorado game, just nothing but great vibes. UCF's going to the playoff. Like it's going to be the most fun week ever. And if they lose, it will not be that. So yeah.
What did you say after the Sam Houston game? Is it was like they're a road win at TCU away. Wait, I forgot what we were like talking about it, and like, now it's not going to happen. I don't even remember what it was now. I was dreaming about it, but forgot. It was like they're a road win at TCU away from being and a win against Colorado, I guess, from being 4-0 going into Florida. Like they're not that far from that, but I think we were kind of operating under the impression that they're going to beat Colorado. We really don't know.
No, I am also completely and fully operating under that impression. I literally said on the post-game podcast that I'm no longer worried about that game, and I still believe that. I think that game is a slam dunk. Congrats to UCF on its win over Colorado, but that's not the game we're here to talk about.
Right.
As far as what's at stake, again, just me getting more fearful as we get closer to the game. The 4-0 start, obviously, right? Because you would obviously be Colorado the week after I've decreed. And the idea of just going 4-0 into that Florida
We're doing this 2 years
so
after you're
appealing.
like, the Navy game's not a real thing we need to talk about. That's whatever. And that was Navy.
Yeah, but Navy wasn't telling the band to not play the fight song after touchdown so that the coach's son could hear his rap song.
No,
so like I'm not I don't care.
If you want to believe,
it fits my worldview, and I enjoyed it, so I'm going to accept it as fact, even if it turns out. Was that really not true? Did that come out?
I don't know. I think Colorado, I think, released a statement that just said this is not true or something like that. That's
okay.
I didn't really read into it, but I saw a tweet about it today.
Okay, I rescind that. What I meant to say was that Navy didn't have a coach who said he was no longer taking questions from the CBS station in Boulder because the national CBS website didn't rank Colorado high enough in its preseason Big 12 poll. So there, we'll stick with that one. But the other thing I've been thinking about is that I was thinking about how horrifically stressful last year was and how they didn't win a game for 6 weeks at one point. And one thing that I'd kind of forgotten that I feel like we need to keep in mind is they only beat one legacy Power 5 team last year. Yeah. That's it. They only beat Oklahoma State. So I just think that it's not like anyone's expecting that to repeat this year, but being able to get that win in your first Big 12 game of just say, okay, we beat another one of them, and just kind of getting that sense of relief of knowing we're not going to go through this again, of like, where are these wins going to come, is that would be appealing for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I just can't even really overstate like how bad the vibes will be if the first like real game, as we've been calling it, is this weekend and they lose it. And then we have a whole week to sit with it until, or a whole 2 weeks, really. We'll have all of next week, then the bye, and then another week up leading up to Colorado. And we'll go into that Colorado game like, wow, if they do lose this game, everybody needs to go, including me. Like, I don't know. It's just they need to win this game. And it's one of those things. Again, like I've gotten more worried probably the last couple of days, partly like I said, because we're going and I'm like, oh, this is going to be bad to determine my mood for the next 2 weeks. But it's also just UCF hasn't been that good on the road under Gus. They're 7-10 on the road, and weren't good on the road last year. Well, their one road win, or no, 2 road wins, right? Cincinnati and Boise State.
Yep.
Yeah. And there were other games that they could have won, but didn't. And I worry that this is going to be one of those close games on the road in a tough environment. It's a sold out game that they'll play like well enough to win, but just lose by 1 or 2. And that's going to break us.
It's kind of a worrying trend. And it's not that there aren't caveats, right? Because they were, from what I recall, I should have them up in front of me. 2022, they were like fine on the road. That year wasn't like a huge issue. Like they won at Memphis, they won at Tulane, they won at USF.
They lost to ECU.
They lost ECU, but you know, that was
And
that
Louisville.
because they were on
No,
the road
not
or
Louisville.
because no, not Louisville. Louisville
That was 21.
On the road in 2022, they won at FAU, they lost at East Carolina, they won at Memphis, they won at Tulane, they won at USF. So like the 2 years where a lot of those losses have come from have been year one under Gus, where the entire team was injured and there were no expectations once they reached conference play. And year 3, where they moved to the Big 12 and we knew it was going to be harder. We just didn't think it was going to be that much harder. So I'm trying to give a little bit of the benefit of the doubt, as I'm not ready to just say, oh yeah, they play badly on the road under Gus. But then part of me is like, this is year 4. Like this is when trends have emerged. You know what I mean? It's not like we could just chalk this up to, oh, well, you never know. I mean, 3 years is a significant amount of time.
And there's context to it all, like you said. Then I would go back and say one of the losses in 2021 was with a healthy Dylan Gabriel. They lost at Louisville. And then they lost also, I know, again, it was Mikey's first start. It was an injury-riddled team, but they lost at Navy. And it was just, that was another one where
that was bad.
Felt pretty inexcusable. So
I was in attendance. Very fun.
Yeah. Wow. So wait, was that 2 weeks in a row or is there a bye week in between?
It's a good question, actually. I don't remember doing a trip.
I forgot you went to back-to-back road games.
There was a bye week. Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, I was like, that sounds super unlike me that I would ever allow myself to get on a plane 2 weeks in a row. So yeah, no, there was a bye week in the middle.
But so, yeah, I mean, it's just, and you're going to go into every year feeling like this, where you've got road games and they're mostly going to be tough in this conference. So, and it's usually going to be a pretty, like, there aren't a lot of bad teams we've talked about, right, at length on this podcast. There aren't a lot of bad teams. So you're going to be playing a like average to pretty good to really good team in probably a tough environment 3 or 4 times a year.
But and what you just said is the nail on the head, because we're talking about TCU. TCU's like the easiest road game they have, maybe the second easiest behind Arizona State. I mean, Florida's going to be harder. Iowa State's going to be harder. West Virginia's going to be harder. So it's kind of like this panic mode of like, if you can't win in that environment, which TCU historically isn't even awesome on their own home field. Like, yeah, they win most of the games like most home teams do, but they don't have some like bounce house-esque record of, oh yeah, it's a really tough place. That's not really the reputation. So I do think the doubts creep in of just, it's going to be a very rough week if they lose, because I don't necessarily think it indicates these things, but we're going to have to talk about, is this like last year again where they just can't hang with these teams? Or can they really just not win road games? And if you can't win at TCU, how are you going to win at Florida? How are you going to win at Iowa State? How are you going to win at West Virginia? It's just, those are conversations I'm not looking forward to having. So it'd be preferable if they just don't lose the game.
Yeah, I would prefer if they didn't. I guess now we can move into a little bit about TCU, the team. They're 2-0 coming in, 34-27 win at Stanford in week 1 and a 45-0 win against Long Island last week. I kind of did the same thing you did, where you like looked at the Long Island game and you're like, there's not much to really. And then I didn't even really have that thought where I was like, oh, well, UCF's all we're basing UCF season so far on is 2 games like this, and not even, a game against Stanford. They went 5-7 last year, 3-6 in the Big 12 a year after going to the college football playoff final and getting demolished by Georgia. That game still annoys me because I wanted it to be a good game so badly, and it was just like in the first quarter I was like, I don't need to watch this anymore. But
65-7 is a tough score. It is admittedly a tough score, but they still made it to the national championship game, which is pretty good.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I obviously can't say I watched them play against Long Island, but we watched them play the last 3 quarters of the Stanford game. And we were kind of talking about it at the time, and I was thinking like, Josh Hoover was pretty good. Like he looked pretty good to me.
Yeah.
And so far, he's their quarterback. So far this year, he's completed 72% of his passes, 620 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. And it feels to me, just from the little bit that I've looked at TCU, it's their passing game that I'm more worried about than their run game.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as far as their run game is, they had an interesting. I don't know if a lot of teams had this. They lost 6 offensive linemen to either graduation or the portal. Ended up having to bring in, I think, 4 of their new offensive linemen are new starters. They have a new center, they have a new left tackle, and the one, if you're going into TCU space, the one big thing that they're freaked out about through their 2 games is run blocking, and it's just felt like the O line
Mhm.
has not done a great job there, and so this is scary in some ways because I think like listen, I hear offensive line bad at run blocking and I immediately go get ready to learn Lee Hunter, buddy. Like no concerns, but for all the transfers UCF brought in and how good they've looked in the 2 fake games, we don't totally know what we have with the secondary yet. And I
Right.
think that there's a very real chance that what this game is us learning a lot about what we have there very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's the case, and I don't. I mean, obviously, if they get completely demolished and they give up 400 passing yards and 5 touchdowns, and just giving up deep ball after deep ball, that will be a concern. But I think it will largely be a good thing to learn, at least
Yeah.
like learn and see where they are, because it is hard to gauge where the pass defense is. I think they have a lot of talent back there. We talked about that all offseason, and I think we've seen some of it so far. I think what was it? They've 4 interceptions so far, and they're all been from different guys. Yeah, I mean, I like that, and Hoover hasn't thrown an interception yet this year, but yeah, it's going to be every single thing we talk about is going to be through the lens of like, well, yeah, this is the first time they're getting tested. It's like
Yeah.
same thing with UCF's offensive line, same thing with everything. But I think it's especially the case for the secondary because I think with the run blocking issues, their running back Cam Cook has been their leader. He has 4 touchdowns, but he only has 139 yards, and I guess that's not even that bad. Like I look at 139 yards and I'm like, RJ gets that in like 10
A
carries.
game. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not that bad, but I think this is going to be much more of a passing attack against UCF, and they got to limit the big plays. Obviously, I think we saw them give up quite a few of those last year, and proving that they can handle it this year and not just get points run up on them. That's going to be important.
Which maybe this is just already me subconsciously changing how I feel about football as a sport to stick with what UCF can do. But to me, I would rather face a team that is successful through the air most of the time but has trouble establishing the run than the other way around, right? Is that a hot take? I just feel like the run game is always more reliable, and I'd be a little more afraid of a team that can just pound it versus a team where it's like, okay, as long as we keep them from like big passing plays, like they're not going to score a lot of points, presumably.
I think because more things can go wrong in the passing game, probably,
Yeah.
sacks, interceptions, just the ball falling
It's
incomplete,
just
like
not as
only
consistent.
right. So if you do have a dominant run game, as long as you can run the ball and you're always going to need to play complementary ball. But yeah, I don't think that's a crazy take. I never really thought about it in those terms, but yeah, if UCF is shutting down the run and saying, TCU is getting 1-2 yards per carry, first of all, they're usually going to run a lot on early downs, and then they're going to be put in third and long situations. And as long as you're not giving up, big passing plays on 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, you're going to be fine living there.
Right.
So, I mean, I think so. I think that's kind of the case with this TCU team. But again, like we think that would be UCF's strength is stopping the run because of the D line, and we do. We largely know. We've seen Lee Hunter play. We've seen Ricky Barber play. It would be a great game to have John Walker for. And we've seen these edge rushers. We've seen Malachi Lawrence obviously last year, and a little bit of Nigel Kelly last week, obviously. But I think we can feel pretty good about the front, and it is a little bit more of a not concern, but a question mark in the secondary.
Yeah. And it's kind of like I don't know. I'm setting myself up for such disappointment here, but and I know I'm putting too much stock in the 2 games that where they really weren't challenged, but just it's hard for me to believe that the secondary is we're going to find out it's a disaster. We might discover a weak point. We might discover
Yeah,
a certain player maybe wasn't as good or effective as we thought they were. We might discover that they're going to rotate things a little differently to account for a better opponent, but I just with the talent they brought in and how that talent performed in these 2 games, I just have a hard time talking myself into like, yeah, it's going to turn out that Sheldon Arnold sucks. He's just going to get beat by Power 5 offenses. I just don't envision that. And it could be totally wrong. But the other thing, too, is it's kind of like they had the 2 kind of preseason games, which, like I said, I've long theorized I think they're going to genuinely benefit from that they got to work out
yeah.
some kinks and learn more about what they had before actually being tested, unlike some other teams. But Josh Hoover's kind of a good starter to see what we have with the secondary, right? Because
Hmm.
he's not a bad quarterback. It's not some guy who can't throw the ball at all or is a G5 level player who we're not going to learn anything, but he's also not Shedeur Sanders, right? It's not like we're freaked
Hmm.
out about what he's going to do then. He's just a pretty solid quarterback who can make some plays but isn't overly spectacular. And that's kind of a good benchmark to sort of learn what we have here.
Yeah, I think so. And I think I don't know. Tell me if you think this is a bad comparison. It almost feels like Will Howard was at Kansas State, is where like he wasn't spectacular, but he made the plays and he made some good throws and he was a solid quarterback. I don't. I think that seems like a fair comparison. Maybe he's a little worse than Will Howard. I don't
I
know,
don't know because Will
but
Howard, when he was at Kansas State, I was of the opinion that he was like the most elite version of a game manager you can find. He's not going to necessarily go out there and win you games on crazy plays that makes SC top 10, but he's definitely not going to lose you games. He's a very solid player. And then Ohio State got him in the portal and suddenly became like, will Howard win the Heisman? And I'm still not totally sure where any of that came from. So I don't think that's a crazy take. I think Josh Hoover's
yeah,
probably worse than Will Howard was last year, but
I think so.
that's probably a solid
Um,
comparison.
and I mean his number one receiver. They've got a pretty good group, but Savion Williams was their probably the leader right now. Last year he had 573 yards and 4 touchdowns on 41 catches. But I think like a team like TCU, I feel like is going to have 3 or 4 guys that you probably have to worry about. But I think the good thing for UCF is they have so many DBs that they'll be able to figure out something that works as long as they can make those in-game adjustments if they have to.
Yeah, unless TCU really surprises us with what they do, which is always possible because we're dealing with the 2 game sample size. It is kind of stylistically interesting, right? It's the offense that is probably just going to try to keep the ball on the ground the entire damn game
Yeah.
versus the team that's going to try to win through the air. It's going to be kind of fun.
Yeah, and I think we're not talking about enough, and we'll see if it plays out this way, if they can be as successful as they have been. But with UCF running the ball as well as they do, if they can start, like if they can control the clock in some of these games against, like if you're facing some high-powered offenses that, yeah, maybe they can score quick, but if they're not on the field that much because you're going down the field with just 11, 12 play drives, that's going to be beneficial.
Yeah, that's how you just torch a defense over time. Is just wear them the hell
Yeah.
out. And now the one thing is we're talking about we know what UCF has with their running backs. That's the least question mark of a question mark on the team. We feel better about KJ after his performance last week. The one UCF position group that we maybe haven't talked about enough, just because there was nothing we could have told from these 2 games, is we're going to learn a lot about UCF's O-line. We're going to learn a lot
Yeah.
about what that unit's really capable of, because again, they looked completely fine against New Hampshire, completely fine against Sam Houston. I don't know if there's a position group you can evaluate less from games against lesser opponents than the O-line. So that we could be in for a very bad surprise if it turns out that there's a clear weakness there. Now we know what UCF has in Amari Kite and Adrian
Mhm.
Medley, and to an extent in Caden Killer. So it's not like there's just question marks abound, but that's still something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I think it is again, it's a good test. I don't know if TCU's front is elite, but they've gotten to the quarterback pretty well in their first 2 games. I think I don't have it written down for some reason, but I think they had 4 sacks against Stanford and maybe 2 last week. So 6 through 2 games is certainly not bad at all. And yeah, it'll be a test. And kind of to that point, like if they can establish it early and they can run the ball like we've talked about with RJ, with Miles Montgomery, and with whether they have Penny Boone in the first half or not. If they can do it with success early on, and your offensive line is moving people around, how hard is it going to be as a defensive line in the fourth quarter to still be dealing with these fresh running backs because they have so many of them, and an offensive line that's been physical? Like as long as the offensive line can be as physical as they need to be to get the run game going, like that is going to be like again wearing a defense down. And
Yeah.
I'm curious and excited to see if that can be something that UCF does on Saturday.
Yeah, and that it's funny because and I know particularly how it feels because I've been on the other side of it when UCF was playing really fast in 2017 and 2018 and 19 and all that. But I just think for TCU's perspective, is there anything more disheartening than let's just say UCF gets the ball first and they grind out this really nice drive, right? Like RJ Harvey pops off for 12 yards, like KJ short throw, RJ for 15 yards, back and forth, back and
Mm-hmm.
forth. UCF gets down the field and scores. Defense is like, Jesus. And then TCU's offense comes out and goes 3-and-out. And now it's like, and we're back. And UCF is just
Yeah.
doing the same thing. And then you couple that with there going to be a situation where TCU's D line trots on the field in a close game in the fourth quarter, and UCF sends out physical running back Penny Boone, who has like 4 carries on the night and is completely rested. It's like that's going to be really tough for defenses to deal with if UCF manages it correctly. And Heupel in particular, and Frost to an extent, had a really hard because Gus plays fast. Like UCF still plays fast, but Frost and Heupel could never slow down when they needed to. Like there would be situations I remember specifically with Heupel where UCF gets the ball back and there's like 4.5 minutes left in a close game, and it's like, okay, let's run some clock. And they just couldn't. Like they just really couldn't. I don't know if it was just it gets them out of rhythm, whatever. Gus, we've seen that multiple times. They will slow the
Mhm.
hell down when they need to. Like pace can ebb and flow very easily in this offense and has through the first 3 years here. So I do think that you bring up a very good point. I hadn't thought about a ton that like, yeah, controlling clock could be a huge advantage that comes with this running back room they have.
Yeah, and I think you're largely going to see UCF have success on the ground. Again, we're not going to see like 380 yards every week, but I think again it'll come down to can KJ make the plays that he needs to make. Nothing crazy, but can he make the throws and keep TCU's defense honest? Because that's when if UCF gets KJ going and they have a balanced, pass and run attack, that's when it's like, how do you stop him? Because sure, you've got KJ completing these short passes, kind of picking them apart, and then you can give the ball to RJ, Miles, Penny, Johnny, whoever.
Right.
That's why they need KJ to be serviceable, and I think he definitely was last week, and now obviously this is gonna be a tougher test for him, but if they can get that from him against a team that, like I said, the pass rush is good. Their run defense wasn't tested a ton, I wouldn't say. Just considering they played Stanford. Stanford really didn't run the ball much on. Like they ran their leading rusher in that game was their quarterback. He ran for 87 yards on 17 carries. And other than that, they didn't really try to run the ball that much. And then Long Island, like they really couldn't run the ball and didn't have
Right.
they had not that many carries. So this is
If,
gonna
if
be
Long Island could run the ball, that's what we would be talking about right now on the podcast.
yeah. So I do think I don't know. It'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting test for the offense to see how they can balance things and how the way they want to win games this year, how they can do that against a more formidable team.
Yeah. And on your point about KJ, I could be setting myself up for disappointment. I often do. But when you couple him having that horrible showing against New Hampshire and us being like, what the hell? And then Gus coming out and saying he just had his best week of practice we've seen with him. And then him coming out against Sam Houston and earning one of the top PFF grades for all quarterbacks in the country for that week and one of the highest grades of his career. That really sort of settled me into the mindset of like, I wonder if what we saw against New Hampshire was more on the mental side than the physical attribute side or talent side. It just seems like, was it a situation where he just wasn't taking the game super seriously, just was kind of like, whatever, it's an FCS. And then that performance happened. He's like, okay, I need to lock in. Then he locks in. I don't know. It's just, it's the whole time after that week after New Hampshire just felt weird of how does a guy who performed the way he does in the SEC come out and do that? And him backing up with Gus saying he had a great week of practice, which I totally just chalked up to coach talk at the time. But then he shows up and backs that up on the field against Sam Houston. I don't know. I don't think anyone is. I still don't think KJ is like an all Big 12 type player. I don't think we're going to see that from him, but I think he's going to do enough to open things up for the running backs. I do see that happening. And I think we say that, we talk about that a lot. I also wouldn't be surprised if we do see some more deep shots here and there for Kobe. They showed that they have a connection there. Through 2 games now, we've seen two great throws and catches there. So mixing in that too, Harvey and Montgomery, Harvey, deep shot to Kobe. That sucks if you're a defense.
Well, I mean, that's what those great UCF offenses like to do in past years is they loved to do that. Where I think it was especially a Heupel thing where it was like it felt like a lot of times, Heupel ran the same 6 plays, but it was because that was how the offense was built. It was run, and then set up the deep shot.
Yep.
So if they can have success with it, then great. And I think one other thing we need to talk about with TCU, we've talked about their run blocking issues, kind of almost a whole new offensive line. They've also been very undisciplined, and we saw it when we were watching the game against Stanford. They had 7 penalties for 100 yards, and I think like a bunch of those came early. Like it was killing drives for them. It was like personal foul stuff, like dumb stuff that you would think, okay, well, they don't do that all the time. And then they go out against Long Island, they still had 6 penalties for 65 yards. So 13 penalties for 165 yards through 2 games is not good. And so there's nothing really I don't think UCF can do as far as like how can we take advantage of this? It's just like one of those things to watch for if they come out and hit the quarterback late, hit somebody out of bounds. Like that kind of stuff is something that TCU has done. So that could benefit UCF.
And if you're a TCU fan and you see your team commit 7 penalties worth 100 yards in your first game, then you see them come out against the FCS and commit 6 penalties for 65 yards, you're freaked, right? I would be if that had been UCF. And this would be the part where I should say, well, penalties, that's a mental thing. That's something teams can really work on. I've watched UCF not be able to figure that out for like 4 years at a time. So I don't know if that's just going to be solved against UCF. And And UCF, other than like the very weird first drive of the Sam Houston game, has been pretty freaking disciplined. So
Yeah.
that's an advantage too. That honestly was one of the stats when we were looking at stuff that had me feeling kind of good about the game. Is just it does feel like UCF maybe just both discipline wise and possibly talent wise, and more well, talent wise is the wrong way to frame it. I just think through 2 games, UCF probably has a little more knowledge of knowing what's working for them and what they want to do since they've
Mhm.
had these 2 games than TCU might be. And I don't know, UCF might be at a little slim bit of an advantage here.
Yeah. And then something else we talked about, just kind of hopping around here, is something we talked about with the Sam Houston game is how much better UCF got on third downs. TCU's kind of been, it was kind of the opposite for them. They went 8 of 15 against Stanford and then 4 of 11 against Long Island. So I mean, that's another thing. That's another thing that again is kind of can sometimes it's not random because a lot of it comes down to process and then kind of are they getting into manageable situations and how are they executing in that certain way. But it's an interesting thing because if they're not executing on third downs and say they're 2 of 7 on third downs in the first half and UCF's getting the ball back and doing stuff with it and grinding the clock down, again, that's another way UCF can win this game. I think that's actually probably a very crucial part. I mean, that's kind of an obvious thing to say is getting off the field on third down, something UCF hasn't always been good at, but if they can get off the field on third down, get the ball back to this offense that will control the clock, that would be a huge thing for them.
Yeah, yeah. I don't like that we're doing this preview and I'm feeling more optimistic about the game. That definitely means they're going to
Yeah,
lose.
I'm talking myself into feeling better than I did like 3 hours ago, which is not good.
But again, we have to keep in mind because the thought process I'm having is TCU has demonstrated problems through 2 games. UCF hasn't yet. And the two things we have to remember are one, UCF has problems. Like they exist. We just haven't noted
Yeah.
them yet. And two, TCU played a Power 4 team and UCF didn't. So yeah, things are going to present that if UCF, even if UCF had played that exact game, gone on the road to Stanford, I think they would have won, but we still would have things we're talking about that we just aren't talking about right now because we don't know. So I'm trying to keep that in mind. And honestly, I think so. I wanted to say 2 more things really quickly on this. The first is that the SJ2E Twitter space with JP Gilbert, which I think we'll find ways to randomly mention for the rest of time because there were just so many shocking things in there. One thing he just kind of casually brought up was he was like, oh, yeah, we've talked to TCU's people. They don't think of UCF as a big game at all. They assume they're just going to beat us. And I'm not surprised by that. I'm kind of assuming that's how every single legacy power conference team on UCF schedule feels about them this year. I'm sure if you ask an Arizona State fan what they feel about UCF, oh, yeah, we have that win on the schedule. So that didn't surprise me. The other thing I wanted to bring up is one of those like not real things that like you worry about. And the not real thing that I'm worried about is something that Gus pointed out in his presser this week. And it's that when you look at UCF or TCU's coordinators, you have Kendall Briles, who, as Gus pointed out, was KJ Jefferson's coach for his best seasons at Arkansas. And on defense, you have defense coordinator Andy Avalos, who has faced Gus's UCF team twice in the last 3 years. And I know those things aren't supposed to like matter, but both of those got me worried because I'm just like, oh, okay, so they have a coordinator who understands KJ probably better than Gus does, and they have a defensive coordinator who's faced this UCF offense twice in 3 years. Lost both times, but still faced it.
Yeah. I'm trying to like balance how to feel about that. Obviously, the Briles thing worries me, I think, a little bit more than Avalos because
I think so too.
when you look at, I mean, what in the first game they played 2021 was I think UCF scored 36.
Yeah.
And then I know UCF only scored 18 on them last year, but that was also the game most famously known for I think both Kobe and Javon tipping up passes. I think were both of them in the end zone or was one of them in the end zone?
I don't think Kobe's was. I know Javon's was.
Kobe's might have been like deep down the field though. That might have set them up like just outside the red zone if he would have just caught it. But
Javon's was arguably the worst UCF play of the last 5 years. It's pretty bad. We let it go since he's incredible, but it was pretty bad.
Yeah. But so like it could have been a better offensive game. Like I don't think that was necessarily like, oh, he was a defensive mastermind and shut down UCF. I mean, they played well, but
yeah,
I don't know. And I don't know how to feel about it because I think he's going to have they've played like the defense has obviously played well. I mean, they played well last week against Long Island, but against Stanford, it was a really weird game. We talked about it, I think, a little bit after Sam Houston was like they only gave up 286 yards against Stanford, but they also only won 34-27, partly because of penalties, partly because of just random stuff happening. Like it's hard to kind of get a read on. I know it's harder probably to get a read on UCF because of the 2 games they played, but even with that one game they played against Stanford, like that was such a weird game that I came away from it not really knowing how to feel about them. and
Yeah,
I'm still kind of feeling that way.
it's tough. We're gonna learn. We're gonna learn things.
Yeah, we
Hopefully
are.
good things. I do think, and this isn't my prediction, and it's not my score prediction, but I don't know if I picture in my head the idea of UCF just winning with ease. Like, just I'm not saying like blow them off the field, but just it was not a overly competitive game and it was never overly in doubt for UCF. I can see that. That doesn't feel ridiculous to me when I imagine that in my head. But I can also imagine a situation where they can't get the passing game going that closes things off for the run game and they just can't really score. Like I don't know. I just it's tough. I see a lot of scenarios.
I don't know if it's the purple and the fact that it's on the road, but like I'm worried that this is a Kansas State repeat from last year where it's like a close game throughout where UCF's doing enough to hang around, but then they can't get it done in the fourth quarter. And I feel like it could be that. I
And if
don't
we're
know.
talking about non-real things like that, you're also afraid of frogs more than anyone I've ever met, and their logo is a
I don't
frog.
like
So there's
frogs.
that to there's that to
I saw a
I
frog
actually have
on
never
Sunday.
like okay, see, like for me that's not newsworthy, but I guess for you it is. I like I've never met anyone in my life like you feel about frogs. I feel like how most people feel about like snakes. Like you're very afraid of frogs.
I don't know if I'd go that far. I just really don't like them. And
It's like every time you see when it's like an event, like you're like I saw a frog. Like it's like bad news. There was a
I
frog in
don't
my life today.
yeah, I don't know. It was weird because this is gonna sound insane. So I saw this frog when I got out of my car. I parked at the Bucks game and I saw like I guess I don't know if it had rained earlier that day, but it rained the day before. Whatever. I see a frog kind of like blending in with the ground and it hops like under the wheel of my car. My immediate thought was, "Oh man, I hope I don't come out of this game in a few hours and that frog is in my car." I don't know how it would have gotten in my car, but I did think about it. I was like, "Oh, I really hope that that frog is not a problem later."
That I love this is what I love about this podcast is never could I have imagined that at some point the sentence would be said, I hope that frog is not a problem later, but here we are. But that's how
Yeah.
people feel about snakes. Like
I hate snakes too, though.
which do you hate more? It has to be snakes, right?
Yeah, I
Snakes
hate
are
snakes
terrifying.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, those things are
But
awful.
I just to me, frogs are cool. Like I owned a frog for years when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Fire-bellied toad. Um,
ugh.
no, he was cool. You would I guess I was gonna say you would have liked him. You most certainly would
I
not have,
wouldn't.
but
I would not have.
But the good news that I have to keep in mind here too is that while their logo is of a frog, a horned frog is a lizard, and I don't think you have
Yeah.
any issues with lizards,
I
so
don't
maybe
really
you're
like
good.
lizards either.
Do you hope we see a horned frog when we're out there?
No, I don't. I don't
Fair,
hope.
fair.
Okay, I found it. I've been scrolling back ever since we started this part of the conversation where I will just say JP Gilbert is on my side about frogs.
Okay.
So shout out to JP for having a correct take about frogs. Yeah, no, they're creepy and bad. Um, anyway, you want to do score predictions?
We can do score prediction.
I again have no idea. Like score predictions to me are maybe my least favorite thing we're going to be doing on the preview podcasts for the whole rest of the season. I'll go with mine first, I guess. I have use. I don't know. I have no rationale behind this at all.
Me
Like I
neither.
was like, did I give them too many points? Not enough points. I feel like I didn't give them enough points, but then I don't know what to give TCU. Like I don't want to go predict UCF's going to win by a lot, and like I don't want to also disrespect UCF's defense because I think they've
We
been
don't
good
need
so far.
scoreboard material for when the TCU
Right.
staff listens to this podcast and prints out our scores in the locker room.
Sonny
So
Dykes is listening right now. What's up, Sonny?
he's listening while we're
UCF.
recording. That'd be crazy.
Well, no, it's people are listening right now. When I say that, they're listening right now. So
Okay. Okay.
yeah, yeah. It's just like when like somebody says like, "Oh, we're talking about." We don't really do this, but like when you're previewing a game for like the next day, and they're like, "Oh, tonight's game," but they're saying that because it comes out on the day of the game.
We're
We don't do
actually
that, but
notably very bad about that. We will refer to the day week of the week
oh,
we're recording,
absolutely.
even when I'm
That's
not
why I
going to post
said
the
we
pod
don't
that
do it.
day.
Anyway, score prediction: UCF 31, TCU 27.
I have I have UCF
Oh,
34. No. I have UCF 34, TCU 28. So we're pretty close.
oh
The
yeah.
line's -2 TCU. I think if
It
this
feels
a TCU podcast, we'd pick TCU to win, but it's a UCF podcast, so we're picking UCF to win. I don't know how anyone can predict a double digit win in either direction based on what we know. That's not to say it won't be. I just don't I don't
mhm.
know how anyone can predict that right now.
But also, I always feel like a 2 point spread to me, and I feel like I've heard someone say this, so it's not like an original thought, but I feel like they always say the home team is like worth 2 points. So basically, like this is even.
Yeah.
Like because TCU's at home, they're a 2 point favorite. But if it was a neutral field, like I'm curious to know because some people do that. They put out the lines for a neutral field, and I don't know it feels like a very, I don't know, game. Like
Yeah,
it's,
my gut
I
reaction
said,
when Vegas puts out a -2 line is just they're just shrugging their shoulders. So like, yeah, your guess is as good as mine. We have no idea.
yeah. And I don't know. Like I was saying, I think UCF could score more than 31. I think like
I think
the
so
run
too.
game could explode and they could score more than that. I also think TCU could score more than 27. I just didn't want I didn't want to go in and say, yeah, the defense is going to shut down TCU and they're going to get up 14 or 17 points and it's going to be like it's an easy UCF win. But I also didn't want to say TCU is going to go and put up 35 because I think this defense has, I have reason to believe that this defense has improved over last year. And I don't know that they're going to be giving up 30 to 40 points every Big 12 game like they did last year. So,
Well, it's just hard because you sort of forget that in the flow of a football game, like there's no such thing as actually accurately predicting a football score because it can be something dumb, like a ball slips out of a player's hand and it gets scooped and scored, or a bad interception, or just busted coverage. Like it's like a football score is an impossible thing to predict. But so we'll see what
yeah.
happens. We also didn't account for and didn't talk about how Xavier Townsend is probably going to set them up in field position very nicely multiple times throughout this game, and that's got to be maybe good for something at some point too. So
Yeah, I think so. He's been incredible
kept
on
it up against
returns,
Sam
and
Houston. Yep.
he also, and I think they were using him pretty creatively too in that Sam Houston game. So kind
Yep.
of just getting the ball in his hands more, which I think is a good thing. All right, I guess is there anything else we can talk about with TCU? I hope we don't see any Horned Frogs, and hope
Yeah,
UCF
if
wins.
really quickly, if you're listening to this, should have said this off the top of the podcast because I know some people drop off. If you're listening to this and you know anything about the Fort Worth and Dallas area and know what we should do, let us know. Just message us one of us on Twitter. Maybe Bailey,
Sure.
because I'm bad at checking DMs, so I'd go with Bailey. But either way.
Well, my DMs aren't open, so like
Oh, okay, go
if
with
I'm
me
not
then.
following
Never
you,
mind. Go with me. And yeah, maybe I'll see
or
it. I don't
DM
know.
or DM the Pegasus Podcast account, one of us
Yes,
will
do
check it.
that. DM the Pegasus. This was the
Yeah,
worst instruction ever. But go ahead and
or
just
email
DM the
us.
Pegasus podcast or email us. There you go.
I give you the directions all the time. You guys know where to follow us and email us. All right, real quick, a little bit of football news. KJ Jefferson, Kobe Hudson, and Nigel Kelly made PFF's Big 12 Team of the Week for Week 2.
And you know
You had
what's
a good
cool on
tweet
that,
about that.
really quickly,
What?
is that this time all of the UCF players who made the team were at the proper position. Shout out again to Deshaun Pace for being named cornerback of the week last week.
That's right. Forgot about that. The other thing is they finalized the 2024 UCF Hall of Fame class. And in addition to Shaquem Griffin being a Hall of Famer this year from UCF football, they are also inducting Mark Giacone, a running back from 1987 to 1990. He had 2,128 career yards. At the time, was second most in UCF history. And he was the first UCF running back to top 1,000 yards in a season also at the time, and won team MVP in 89 and 90. So that's cool. Good
Very cool.
stuff.
Very cool.
A little bit of a history lesson for me today. I was like, I saw that tweet and I was like, let me look into this guy. So that was fun. Game of the week. It is UCF volleyball, who's 4-0 so far this season. They have two games this week. They play Saturday against FAU in Tallahassee, but the game of the week is UCF volleyball at number 21 Florida State, obviously also in Tallahassee. That game is Sunday at 1 o'clock. Florida State's 4-1 right now, like I said, ranked 21st. Be really cool to see UCF come out of this week 6-0. Maybe they'd find themselves with a shot to be ranked, and we'll see.
Would be cool. I feel like their
Yeah.
season first loss is like always to FSU, but
It
we'll
does
hope for
feel
the
that
best.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, tweet of the week.
Tweet of the week. We got a few.
Oh,
So just in case you're, only a UCF fan and don't follow the rest of college football, USF did something amazing this weekend and lost to Alabama 42-16. And yes, I know it was a close game until late. I don't care. They lost. I said they were going to lose by a lot, and they did. I don't know what, like, I know that USF fans are notorious as a fan base for setting the bar exactly at where they are and just declaring that that's the best you can be. But like going with, we feel really great about the direction of our program and know we're on the right track because we lost 42-16 to Alabama is one of the weirder takes I've seen. So I just wanted to throw that, like I said, it's been a Twitter celebration for them since they lost the game 42-16. They're in a very good mood. Just a few tweets I want to shout out. Rob Wilson said, we are outpacing UCF in every area now except conference, praying we get an invite. That's right. Now that USF has been blown out by Alabama, they are outpacing UCF in every area. Your guess is as good as mine as to how that could be possible. USF bullpen tweeted retweet to bring college game day to USF versus Miami because again, their inflated self-importance makes them think that that's a game anyone cares about outside of Florida. Sidelines USF tweeted there will be more USF fans on Saturday in the stands than Southern Miss fans who they play at this weekend. USF fans travel like a P4 school. I wonder if they are planning on ever traveling to their own stadium since they currently do not. So not sure about that one, but yeah, just a few tweets to shout out. There's plenty more. You guys should go look. Again, USF fans in a mood of jubilation over their blowout loss to Alabama.
Have you seen the schedule too for that week against Miami, what they want game day for?
No.
Let me pull it up real quick. That's the 21st, I believe. Yeah, it is. So Tennessee at Oklahoma is one of them. What were the other ones? Utah and Oklahoma State was another one, another big game. USC at Michigan. Those are the three games they believe that they shouldn't get game day and that USF should.
USC at Michigan, two of the most popular brands in all of the sport. Miami versus an in-state G5 team. Tough one. Tough. Oh, but hold on, Bailey. I need to tell you, this G5 team did just lose to Alabama 42-16. So does that pique your interest anymore in seeing that game on game day?
No, it doesn't. But where would game day even be?
I don't know. On the lot where they're gonna build their new stadium and just be like,
so would they
here.
have it on campus or would they have it at the stadium?
Know. I don't know. Actually, that's actually a very good question. I don't know. I don't know how game day usually. I assume they're usually on campus. One of the weirder ones for Memphis, they did it on Beale Street, which I actually feel like I thought that was lame at the time. I feel like if you're Memphis, you would have wanted that. Especially we went to Memphis campus; it was gorgeous. But
yeah, and there was definitely space for it on Memphis campus.
Oh yeah, they had that huge green area.
Yeah. But I think every college I think has like a big green area somewhere.
But so, I have great news. Game day will not have to worry about solving that problem because they're not going to Miami at USF.
All right. Cool. We can leave it there. I didn't really know. I never really know where tweet of the week is going. When you said we have multiple tweets of the week, many things popped in my head and I kind of forgot about this whole USF Alabama thing.
I will say the other big thing going on right now is I always forget, like it's such a change from being in the G5 because in the G5 it was like trash talking other fan bases before games. UCF it was like the Cincy week and the USF week, and that was kind of the only time it happened. Like TCU fans and UCF fans have been going back and forth for days now. I love it. The TCU fans are saying Orlando's a terrible city, and I'm not even mad. It's just funny.
I have a hot take. It's not even a hot take, really. I'm bored of it. Nothing's original. Like I don't think it's interesting at all. Like so, like I've just been.
Why don't you mix it up? Hop in there and take it in a new direction.
No, I'm just saying like both sides. It's like unoriginal. So it's like they're trying too hard to come up with anything. It's just like
I just like that there are actual fans of these teams.
Oh, that's nice.
On social media who like want to have trash talk because like in the AAC there were not. So
that's a good. Okay,
I'm
so
just happy about
maybe
that.
that's it. I think it's good. That's a good thing. I think just the level, like the quality of trash talk, is horrible.
I think we talked about this last year too, didn't we? That a lot of the like there was a lot of trash talk, but a lot of it was kind of lame trash talk. Like UCF fans are so chronically online that they know how to be more creative.
Yeah, but even from UCF fans, I think it's largely been not that great. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have time for it. All right, leave it there. We'll be back on Saturday night, probably very late Saturday night, maybe even Sunday morning, with our post-game podcast.
Stay up for it if you're a real fan.
Hotel and we'll be back with episode 226 after the TCU game. Until then, you can find us on Twitter at BaileyJAdams22, at @ByCASimmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. Thank you guys so much for being with us, and we will talk to you on Saturday.
Bye, everybody.